Whether you play big stages, weekend gigs at small local venues, or only at home for your own enjoyment, when it comes to guitars, we all have our biases and preferences. Now, of course, the really important preferences should be those that impact playability, feel, and sound. But more than any other instrument I can think of, the way our guitars look carries as much, and in many cases, more weight than the way it functions. In fact, I'm sure there's an enormous number of players who could be playing something that would be more comfortable and suit their playing better, but choose instead to play a guitar that has the look they desire. Now, why is that? I recently watched a video about heritage guitars. Now, I don't often read other channels' comments, but in this case, I was a little curious and almost immediately came across someone saying, "I just can't get past the heritage headstock." Well, my knee-jerk reaction was, well, it's actually a functionally better design. And who stares at the headstock when they're playing? But then I took a step back, did a little self-reflection, and realized I have plenty of my own quirky preferences, some of which make even less sense. So I get it. And today I'm going to talk about some of those peculiar little biases. I'll start with what I'd consider the probable deal breakers. Now, while a lot of guitars can win me over once I get one in my hands, here are a few personal turnoffs that usually have me giving certain guitars a hard pass. Again, this isn't about function. Neck carve, tuning stability, ergonomics, and of course, actual sound are all absolutely the most important reasons for anyone to choose or pass on a guitar. But that's a different conversation. Now, before we go further, it shouldn't need to be said, but when it comes to subjectivity, I don't believe anyone has the market cornered on good taste. Now, I'm not one of those people you see on the forums who act like if they don't like it, no one should. If I love a certain look and you think it's awful, great. It'd be a dull world if we all liked the same things. So while keeping that in mind, here are a few of my current hard passes. Obviously, fancy tops have been around probably as long as guitar building. But it seems like it was the 90s when highly figured tops reached the height of their mass popularity. And back then, I was totally on board with it, to the point where it was hard to imagine too much figuring. But as the years have worn on, I've become less and less attracted to them. In fact, while I still appreciate many of the really beautiful flame top guitars like, say, the fancier PRS core models, if I were buying one today, I'd most likely go for a somewhat more subdued flame, if not a solid finish. In any case, for whatever reason, I'm completely over quilt tops. Well, it shouldn't surprise anyone I was never into super strat shredders. Now, funny enough, the only time in my career where my main stage guitar was a Gibson Les Paul was a few years in the 80s, when it seemed like everyone was dumping them in favor of brightly colored super strats with really skinny necks. Again, not a thing wrong with those guitars if they suit your music and fit your playing style and image. For most players, I think it really comes down to the music of our formative years. Now, if you were learning guitar in the 80s, it'd be no surprise if something like a Steve Vai Gem was high up on your list of desirable guitars. I was a teenager in the 60s, so for me, not so much. The next personal turnoff? Thankfully, I don't play a style that requires extreme whammy shenanigans, because these systems have always struck me as something of an eyesore. Now, of course, you may really need one, but for me, and the way I tend to use the bar, a regular Strat bridge is fine, or one of the excellent variations on the design, like the PRS vibrato. And finally, like the rest of the list, just not my thing. I think it looks okay on modern designs like headless guitars, 7 and 8 string instruments, and so on. But if I was looking at a traditional Fender or Gibson style guitar, and it was loaded with black hardware, Well, I'd be calculating how much it's going to cost to replace everything with nickel parts. So I guess not necessarily a true deal breaker, but the guitar would have to be special and or priced right. And to further prove how silly it is to look down on someone else's taste, my preferences are periodically updated, usually unexpectedly. Here's a perfect example. I reviewed this American Vintage II 73 Strat just a little while back, and I ended up liking it so much it altered several of my former biases. Now, for starters, I decided decades ago I preferred the original small Strat headstock, even though my first Strat, probably a 1970 model, had a large headstock. I was convinced I'd never buy another big headstock Strat. And had I not bought this guitar for review, well, I would probably still be convinced small headstocks look much better. Not only that, but I'm smitten with this Lake Placid blue finish, a color that was way down the list before this one arrived. I was also allergic to more than one string tree and 3-bolt neck joints. And finally, I was convinced early 60s pickups were my absolute favorites, but I love the sound of these pure vintage 73s. And this proves it might only take the right guitar to blow all your preconceptions right out of the water. So how about it? I'm sure most of you have visual deal breakers of your own. Just remember, regardless of what you may hear, in most cases, it's not a matter of good versus bad taste. Also, keep your mind open and don't be overly influenced by someone else's opinions when it comes to looks. This is one area where you do you really should be your mantra. Thanks so much for joining me today. If you enjoyed today's installment, be sure to give it a like. Also, please take a moment to subscribe if you haven't yet. And finally, if you'd like to further support the channel, well, consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/Leonard Griffey Blues. And with that, I'll say goodbye for now, and I'll see you again very soon.